Welcome to CBS News Prime Time. I'm John Dickerson. The voting starts in the first caucus state.
I'm still trying to decide which candidate I like the best out of the ones that we have. I'm struggling with that a little bit.
Republican voters begin the presidential nominating contest in the bitter cold of Iowa. It's very cold everywhere else, too. America in the deep freeze. And 100 days into the Israel-Hamas war, a new strike in the region against a U.S.-owned ship. Hello, and thank you for joining us. We begin our report in Iowa, where in 1 hour, Republican voters will caucus for their choice for the next nominee for President of the United States. In negative-degree temperatures, thousands of Iowans ventured out to schoolhouses, community centers, and fire stations to stand behind their preferred candidate. Donald Trump has dominated the race and, by all polling and expert analysis, is likely to have a strong night. A stunning turn of events 3 years after the state's venerable 7-term senator Chuck Grassley said Trump could no longer lead the party after his actions that led to the attack on the Capitol of January 6th. The cliche goes that a candidate needs not to win Iowa, but just get a ticket out of the state for future contests. There's one ticket with Donald Trump's name on it. And for the other candidates, there are 4 left. The question to be answered tonight is whether there are any more tickets. Here's what some of them had to say today.
We can't continue to be a country in disarray with the world on fire. And we can't do that with 4 more years of chaos.
And yes, we need a president who can serve 2 terms, not just the lame duck president. But it's really beyond just that.
We have a team out in Des Moines, Iowa, including our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, chief White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, and campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi. Ed and Major, you both have been on the campaign trail for a while. You've seen a few of these over the years. So what strikes you about this one?
Ed, you go first.
You sure?
Yes, indeed,
all right,
please.
Well, so this is my 5th. And, John, I think the biggest takeaway for me after spending the last 2 weeks here is there's a lot less joy in this campaign season than there has been in the past. There's a lot more fear, resentment, anger, desire for retribution, or concern about what many voters and what Nikki Haley would call chaos, not only in Washington and how it's being managed, but around the world, and the crises that are sort of enveloping the current White House and that she believes need to be handled differently. And I think the fact that Trump, as you said so adroitly there, has at least one of these tickets stamped with his name on it and the others are fighting over whatever might be left, it has just made this such a different dynamic in that many of these in the past have been a little more multipolar.
Yep.
And this one has been anything but.
And I would say, John, to build on what Ed just observed, this race has been stable for a year, except for dropouts. And usually you don't see people drop out in Iowa, especially when they're senators like Tim Scott or former vice presidents like Mike Pence or a sitting governor like Doug Burgum. All of them came to Iowa with some expectation that if they worked hard here, they could build something. But all 3 determined, independently of one another, that Trump's lead was so large here, so formidable, and so implacable, there was no point in campaigning even in Iowa. They didn't even wait to New Hampshire or South Carolina. Iowa knocked them out before weeks and weeks and weeks before the caucuses. And to Ed's point about the sort of dark psychology here, there is a sense that Republicans who are aligned with former President Trump are not just excited and loyal, they're angry. And they view what's been going on in the context of January 6th as overreaction by Democrats, overreaction by the media, the indictments, as to them definitional proof, not a suggestion, John, but definitional proof of a 2-tiered system of justice. That may not be the way the rest of the country looks at it, but here they do. And they have rallied aggressively to Trump's behalf, not just sympathizing with him, but wanting to show up, especially on a night tonight when the temperatures are so low, to aggressively send a signal. We're not just with him, we are really, really with him.
And Olivia, you are in the thicket of the Trump campaign. So what are you hearing from them today?
Yeah, hi, John. It's good to be with you. Unlike my colleagues, this is my first time in the Iowa caucus cycle, so it's been very interesting to see it as a newcomer really here in the state. I'm at the Trump campaign media watch site, where tonight we'll be watching the results come in and unfold, and they're really projecting to really have a good night. You know, Trump might not break that 50-point, that goal that he had set to really, you know, widen the field and really just make a statement here in Iowa, but he still might be within that 12 percentage point range. The reason why the 12 percentage point is notable is because the last time a Republican here won by that margin was 1988, and that was Bob Dole. I know you know American history, so you know that. But for those viewers at home, you know, that's a notable time. So Trump is really gunning for that tonight. I had a chance earlier to speak with a Trump campaign official about whether or not that's doable. They still think it's doable, but the turnout really needs to be with rural voters. This person was also in eastern Iowa, near Iowa City, and his goal today was to get as many Trump supporters out as possible. Literally. A lot of them are still buried under snow, under 4- and 5-foot drifts of snow that have really come through and covered their driveways, and they're older voters, so they can't necessarily get out and get that snow out of the way. He was literally going around in a skid steer, moving one of those little rolling things with a little hitch on it, moving snow out of the way to get these people out. So that'll really be what I'm watching tonight. If those people are getting out to the precincts and they're able to vote for Donald Trump, that is what will hand him a win here tonight, that decisive 12-point margin win that he is so desperately looking for tonight here in Iowa.
Olivia, giving us the literal efforts that people are going to that matched up with what you were saying, Major, about just how committed those Trump voters are. Quickly to both, Major, I'll start with you, both you and Ed. The other candidates, still in the sound bites we ran from Haley and DeSantis, very generalized comments about Donald Trump. Is that just going to be the way it is for the rest of this race, Major?
It won't be for Nikki Haley if she comes in second or a respectable third here, and that'll be up to her campaign to make that message and the media and the others to, especially in New Hampshire, receive it that way. She's going to be hit directly and aggressively by the Trump campaign. She's going to have to answer back about who Donald Trump is, why she is more fit, more qualified, a better Republican choice for the nomination. So after Iowa, I expect that to get more intense, because if Haley doesn't meet the Trump campaign attacks, he will, in all likelihood, devour her in New Hampshire or South Carolina, or possibly both.
And she is running now, John, a new attack ad tonight in New Hampshire that goes back to the original premise of her bid, that she is the best ultimate change agent to run Washington and run the country, and to give voters a different option than the current and former presidents. And it visually uses the two of them and says, if you're sick of these guys, come with me. That is a unique message to New Hampshire, given its open primary process that invites independents and maybe Democrats who are hungry to participate in a primary this year and don't really have one in the Granite State because of the president's standing. Watch that message resonate. And Ron DeSantis isn't going to New Hampshire right away. No. He's going to South Carolina, for some reason believing that despite Haley's home state roots, despite the deep popularity of the former president, he can somehow make a dent there, or at least a statement, plant a flag, and then get on to New Hampshire. And the other thing we don't know, will anyone who's still in the field after tonight debate each other before New Hampshire? That's an open question, as the Haley campaign's raising questions whether Trump would be willing to show up for one. If not, she might not either.
And as we all know, travel plans are very contingent until the voting takes place. A lot of airplanes are booked that never go to the states they meant to when the results come in. Major Garrett, Ed O'Keefe, and Olivia Rinaldi in Des Moines. Have a great night, y'all. Thank you. Let's go now to CBS News Election and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto, who is standing by at the CBS News data desk, where he will be watching over the results of both the voting and the entrance polls. Anthony, entrance polls. We're usually talking on these nights about exit polls. Explain to me what the difference is.
You got it. Good evening, John. The difference is that for a caucus, we interview people on the way in. And that's because they're going to go in, they're going to caucus or meet, and they'll be in there for a while. So it makes more sense to ask them not just who they're intending to vote for, but what's on their minds and what are their top issues. That's all the information you're going to start seeing from us. As we speak, they're all over the state. We've sent reporters to precincts, randomly selected all over, asking voters those questions. May have a sense of what turnout is like in maybe a half an hour to an hour, so that'll be helpful. And then this blank canvas, if you will, this map of Iowa will be filled in with results. People start voting, they tell us, around 8:20 or so Eastern, 7:20 Central. and that's how an entrance poll works, John.
Anthony, you've been surveying voters, thinking about how they approach this campaign. So now we get actual data. What are you looking for? What's on your mind as these results come in?
Well, look, Donald Trump has done really well in the pre-election polls. One of the things, and frankly, this is not news, right? He's got really strong support. This is national, but it holds true everywhere. He's got people who say they're considering only him. But there's these other elements, John, that I've been watching pretty carefully. For example, when he talks about retribution, when he talks about revenge, some of these concepts, you put those to the public, and you see these very distinct differences between people in the party who consider themselves members of the MAGA movement, who by and large are more likely to want things like criminally going after his political opponents than the rest of the party, the ones who don't consider themselves MAGA. And it's that MAGA base that I'm really going to be watching. In our polling, about half the Iowa electorate considers themselves part of that movement. And they're not just solidly with Trump, but they want a much more, I will say, combative approach. They want they want culture issues front and center, and they certainly want things like pardons for the January 6th rioters. All of those things really stand out to me as differences within that MAGA movement, as well as the fact that that undergirds Trump's voting base, John.
An intensity of voting concern that Olivia Rinaldi introduced us to tonight as a skid steer driver, clearing the snow to make sure people get out. It's that kind of intensity it sounds like you're describing. Anthony Salvanto, always great to be with you. Can't wait to hear what the results are. Thanks again.
Thanks.
A reminder, we will have continuing coverage of the Iowa caucuses throughout the evening with a special edition of America Decides at 8 p.m. Eastern and CBS News Prime Time at 10. The cold, wintry weather isn't just in Iowa. Some towns have been blanketed, like this snowbound upstate New York neighborhood. In other places, like Minnesota, the temperatures are well below zero, and wind chills are as low as a dangerously negative 45 degrees. Severe weather is affecting airports across the country. As of 7 p.m. this evening, more than 7,000 flights were delayed. 2,700 have been canceled altogether. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca joins us now from a snowy Memphis, Tennessee. Omar, which cities are facing the most delays?
Well, right now, John, what we're seeing with FlightAware and the misery map, as they call it, are Dallas, Houston, and Denver. So we're talking DFW Airport, Bush Intercontinental in Houston, and Denver. And for people who, well, what does that mean? That means American Airlines, which is based out of DFW, United, which has a huge hub in Houston, and also Denver, which has United, a huge hub there. So any of those connecting flights kind of in the south and southwest, things are not very good there right now.
Oof. And you are in Memphis. What's it like there, and how are they handling it? They don't get a whole heck of a lot of big snow there?
Well, no. I mean, the snow that they've had today is like more than they've had in the last 2 years combined. But total-wise, it's not a huge amount, but it's enough for this area to basically cripple everything. I mean, they got anywhere from 2 to 3 inches, and we've only seen a handful of salt and sand trucks. Luckily, it was holiday. It was it's MLK Day here, and there's usually a big event for MLK. Here in Memphis, of course, but they decided to do it virtual because of the roads. There's a car passing by me right now, and they're driving on just packed snow at this point. There's no, we're not seeing any street right now. So it's cold. They've opened warming centers for people in need. The good thing is they're listening to city officials. They're listening to their elected leaders. They're actually staying home and not getting on the road.
Omar Villafranca from Memphis. Thanks so much, Omar. For more coverage on the winter storms and frigid temperatures nationwide, here's meteorologist Colleen Coyle from our partners at the Weather Channel.
2024 off to a very busy and snowy start as we're tracking our 4th winter storm since January 1st. Heather is going to be bringing some snowfall up across the I-95 corridor, breaking our 700-plus day streak for some big cities like New York, Philly, D.C., finally getting in on some snowfall. Putting us into motion as we head through the overnight hours into early Tuesday morning, certainly going to bring in some travel delays. Not going to be a big impact, but at least it will bust that streak of snowless weather for them, but will be a little bit of a winter wonderland there as we head through the beginning of this week. But the bigger story, too, is going to be the cold that sticks around. Look at these wind chills. Wednesday morning, sub-zero wind chills. Chicago, 20 below, and the cold really sticks with us. Now, for the West Coast, a second time in a row, Portland is going to be looking at ice and snow. We have an ice storm warning that goes into effect tomorrow. Certainly could bring in some dangerous and very impactful weather. Portland all the way down through Eugene. For more in-depth coverage, watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Colleen Coyle, thank you. We'll head back to Iowa, where caucus goers are getting ready to cast their votes. We'll speak to the chairman of the Republican Party. Plus, we're already looking ahead to the next Republican contest and whether the process in New Hampshire could mean a different outcome for the candidates. Here streaming CBS News Prime Time. The Iowa caucuses will begin in less than 45 minutes. Here's a look inside the Des Moines Convention Center. It's currently -1 degrees in the city. The Iowa caucuses are the first test of the 2024 race. It's a process that requires more than merely picking a candidate. Representatives of the campaigns make short speeches, party business is conducted, and then the votes are cast and counted in more than 1,600 precincts across the state's 99 counties. And if it all goes well, Jeff Kaufman will breathe a sigh of relief. He is the chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa, and he joins us now. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us. It's a very busy night. It's cold. Tell me about the effect that the weather might have on the caucuses.
Well, at this point, if I had to deal with some weather-related situation, I'd much rather deal with the cold than blinding snow or ice. We've had the snow plows have been able to be out for 48 hours. They're doing a fantastic job. I believe we're going to have a robust turnout. This is not the first rodeo for almost every caucus attendee. We're going to have multiple days like this in the Iowa winter, and I think we're going to have a good night.
Tell me, Jeff, I hate to bring up bad memories, but you weren't chairman of the party, so it's not your problem. But in 2012, we were all there, and Mitt Romney was declared the winner of the caucuses. And then later, it turned out that Rick Santorum, Pennsylvania senator, had won. How do you ensure that something like that doesn't happen again? And we're in an atmosphere where there's greater skepticism about votes, vote counting, and so forth, in part because of the Republican frontrunner.
Sure. And, you know, what I would do to prevent something like that is not call the election that early. I mean, that was not a breakdown in the process. It was a decision in terms of calling that election. As far as voter integrity, though, John, this is the most transparent process, and I mean this literally, in the country. We count the votes in the room. Candidates can have a representative watch the counting. We report the votes in the room. You can double check after we report everything to you, and the people in the room can double check that. And if that's not enough, we've got a paper trail that we collect every single piece of paper from all 1,600 plus precincts. I feel very, very calm and very, very confident in our election integrity and our transparency.
Help me understand the electorate as you understand it. It would be foolish for us to talk about polls, really, because we're about to get real results. But I want to ask you as a kind of general matter, when you look at Governor DeSantis, he would seem to be, having spent some time in Iowa over the last 30 years, I would think a candidate really well set up for the state. He's got support in the evangelical community. He went through all 99 counties. He won a very big election in 2022. He's got good strength with the various different parts of the base in his electorally important state. He's got the endorsement of the governor. He's got a good ground game. Shouldn't he be positioned really well, poised to do well in Iowa? Do you agree? And if he doesn't, what does that mean?
Well, and he may very well. You're right. You know, polling in a caucus is tricky. I mean, clearly we have a front runner, and that's been a consistent response from the polls from day one. But here's the thing about Iowa voters: we take this very, very seriously. We're not supposed to choose the next president. We're supposed to kick the tires. We're supposed to give them a neutral playing field where they can actually make their case. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here. And I'll tell you, I see Iowa voters, they will come to events even after they pick their candidate because they want to check off. I can tell you that every single voter in this state has given due deference to everything, including the policy.
Let me ask you as a final question. Just after the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th, Senator Chuck Grassley, who knows Iowans, elected 7 times, he said that the attack was so damaging to President Trump that, quote, there's very little opportunity for him to lead the Republican Party. The other Iowa Senator, Joni Ernst, said, I don't know how anybody can be proud about the actions that they took, speaking of the rioters. Well, President Trump, not only is leader of the party, he's probably more leader than he ever has been. As you mentioned, he's the front runner, and he is proud of the actions that were taken on January 6th. What did the Iowa senators misunderstand about their Republican voters?
Well, and I'm not going to second guess what Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst believed and what the context was of that statement. I can tell you this, as a post-January 6th, I can tell you about January 15th. In 2 hours, you're going to start to see what Iowa voters think about all of those incidences. And I'll tell you, they have the final word on this issue.
Indeed. Jeff Kaufman, Iowa GOP chair, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, John. It's my pleasure.
All eyes may be on Iowa tonight, but we always like to jump ahead. So we're already looking ahead for the next contest, and that's in New Hampshire. The GOP primary is next week. Voters will cast ballots in the Republican presidential primaries Tuesday, January 23rd. Ahead of that, there will be a GOP primary debate in New Hampshire this Thursday, but it's unclear who will participate or if it will move the needle for any particular candidate. For more, we're joined by CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, wipe everybody's mind clear. We're no longer thinking about Iowa for the purposes of this conversation. Who's put in the most effort in New Hampshire, and what form did it take, and what does that tell us about the state?
Hey, John, good to see you. Well, as you know from covering these campaigns, New Hampshire does not like to take its cues from Iowa and kind of prides itself for setting a different tone and is a better projector of who would be the eventual nominee. Here on the ground, we were following supporters of Nikki Haley, who believe that she can, make a good play here in New Hampshire, regardless of what the results are in Iowa. We followed them canvassing today. They were knocking on doors, trying to appeal to voters, particularly independent voters or undeclared voters, as they are called here, who play an outsized role in elections here in primaries. It's an open primary, so even if you're unaffiliated, you can still vote in the primary. Nikki Haley is within striking distance in some polls of Donald Trump, but that's if you combine her totals with supporters of Chris Christie, who dropped out of the race last week, and that is no sure bet.
Christie is out, as you said. He put a lot of effort into New Hampshire, looking to do what, say John McCain was successful at doing, which is knocking off the clear frontrunner in the party, at least in that state. So how are the Christie votes dispersing? Are they going to Haley, or are they a group of voters who might not vote at all now that Christie's out of the race?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. I mean, according to our poll, when Christie was still in the race, the bulk of his supporters would pick Haley as their second choice. Haley supporters are certainly hoping and believing that they will eventually migrate to her. But there's also this question of those undeclared or unaffiliated independent voters. Do they show up at all, or are they more aligned with Democrats and believing that they don't want to support any candidate in this Republican primary? That remains an open question. It was interesting because of what we heard from Christie on the hot mic last week. It's not clear that he will endorse anybody in this race. He had played a very different kind of campaign here in New Hampshire, making it really about taking this case to Donald Trump and trying to make this a race. New Hampshire is a place that is fertile ground for underdogs, as you mentioned. And Bill Clinton, of course, came in second here when he ran and declared himself the comeback kid. Lots of candidates have used New Hampshire to try to catapult themselves nationally through the rest of the contest, including Donald Trump himself, who, as we know, lost Iowa in 2016, won here, and the rest is history. The question is, are those voters still as fervent as they were, or are there some able to be picked off? And Nikki Haley is hoping to make that play.
All to be determined next week. Caitlin Huey-Burns in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thanks so much. Prioritizing America's immigration issues could help decide who wins the White House in November. We'll show you what a new CBS News poll found amid new tensions at the border. You're streaming CBS News Prime Time. Welcome back to CBS News Prime Time. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The GOP Iowa caucuses will convene tonight in about half an hour. This is the first test of the 2024 election season, with 5 Republicans vying for their party's nomination. Donald Trump has maintained a lead in the polls. of this race. This year's caucuses are being held as record low temperatures grip the state, which has led to concerns about turnout. Cold weather is also affecting other parts of the country, and millions of Americans are under wind chill alerts. Meantime, the next nominating contest is just a week away. The New Hampshire GOP primaries get underway on Tuesday, before dates in February for Nevada, South Carolina, and Michigan. Let's turn to our panel of CBS News campaign reporters in Iowa. Aaron Navarro is following the DeSantis campaign. Torian Small is at caucus site in Des Moines, and Nydia Cavazos is covering Nikki Haley. Well, it's great to be with all of you on an exciting night. Aaron, let's start with you. What's the mood of the DeSantis campaign as the night gets underway? The governor was predicting a big win a little while ago. Are they still in that kind of mood?
John, good to be with you. They've definitely dialed back expectations a bit. They have embraced the self-dubbed underdog status, pointing to the amount of money spent in the closing months of this race on negative ads against the Florida governor, and also pointing to their positioning in the polls. The Des Moines Register poll showed them at third, right behind Trump and Nikki Haley. And they think that the groundwork that they've built, the grassroots organizing, the Never Back Down, the Super PAC has built, will help propel them at least to overperform some of these polls and get second place, and from talking to some bundlers that are supporting the governor, in the best case scenario, get within 10 points of former President Trump.
And Nydia, how critical is Iowa to the Haley campaign? And are they treating it that way, or are they already talking a lot about New Hampshire?
You know, when it comes to Iowa and Nikki Haley, this isn't a make or break situation. But what is critical to Nikki Haley here in Iowa is her momentum. Can she defend that momentum she has been on during the past months? Can she continue to take it on to New Hampshire? And we're going to be looking out for two things. Can she solidify her second place position, as she's been polling between second and third place in polls after Governor Ron DeSantis and sometimes before DeSantis? But also we're going to be looking at tracking whether she can narrow that gap between herself and former President Donald Trump. Now we're going to see whether this momentum, how this momentum is truly defined to take on to New Hampshire.
And Torian, you are at a caucus site in Des Moines. Give us a sense of the scene there as this night gets underway, one that a lot of Iowans have been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, John, so what started out as a trickle of voters coming in has turned to a somewhat steady stream. I'm at a mega site. This is Franklin Junior High in Des Moines. And this is also the site where Nikki Haley will speak. Usually a precinct captain or a volunteer will give a speech on behalf of the campaign during the proceedings of the caucuses. Tonight, she decided that she's going to make a speech at this one, potentially, because of the turnout here. So far, we have 5 precincts set in this one spot. That's up to 1,500, anywhere from 15 to 2,000 voters all in one place to hear her message, her closing arguments before they cast their pick for the potential next Republican nominee.
And Aaron, let's talk a little bit about issues. We kind of know the landscape. So I'll ask you a kind of forked question. You can take it either way you want. Is there an issue that you've heard about that isn't immigration or inflation in the economy that has surprised you as coming up in what you've heard? Or on those other issues, which we've heard a lot about, is there a take or a way that the audiences have responded that that has struck you in what you've heard?
Two things have surprised me. When I first asked voters what their most important issue is, going into covering this campaign this cycle, I was expecting the economy to be a bigger topic. It's often brought up after immigration or after education, surprisingly, with some of the voters that are attending DeSantis events, are considering him, or are on the fence. Another thing, Trump's legal issues in recent months. And of course, we've seen poll after poll that shows Trump gets a boost in the primary with a broader GOP electorate after his legal cases. But for the subsection, the snapshot of DeSantis voters that I talked to, people at DeSantis events, they cite Trump's legal cases as a distraction, as a reason to vote against him. And that's really surprised me, especially when you square it with the rest of the Republican electorate.
It's interesting. Nydia, how do you, I'll ask you kind of a version of the same question. Any issues in particular that surprised you, or on those main issues we keep hearing about, has there been a take that you've noticed?
Well, we can definitely say that as far as the early voting states, when it comes to Iowa and New Hampshire, what we most hear from voters, and especially voters coming into Nikki Haley's town halls that I've been covering over the past months, they mention over and over their concerns for the U.S. southern border, the amount of immigrants that they've been seeing, the crossings throughout the past months. And even though they're far removed from the border, they say they consider it a national security threat. And it is why sometimes they have mentioned that Nikki Haley's stance on immigration and overall her foreign policy and her experience with these issues, they say they're willing to support her because they truly believe that she can put a stop to what's happening not only at the southern border but also the northern, and overall they're just caring about national security. And
Torian, you mentioned that there was kind of a more steady flow of voters into that caucus location. Does that suggest anything to you about people being able to get around the weather? Of course, you're near Des Moines, so it's not a long rural trek. But tell us what you can say, if anything, about enthusiasm that you're seeing tonight, and then maybe just more broadly about enthusiasm that you've seen.
Yeah, that was certainly a concern, right? Whether or not these frigid temperatures would take a hit to what was considered to be a record turnout, or what the party was anticipating would be a record turnout. So far, we're not seeing too much of that. I haven't been in the room for the past 10 minutes, so I couldn't really survey to see how much of it has been filled. But again, the caucus chair here believes that anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 voters are expected to show up. The voters that I talked to coming through, though, said the reason for that enthusiasm is because they're actually pretty satisfied with the candidates that they have to choose from. A lot of them are still between two picks. They might not be fully undecided, but they're vacillating between, be it DeSantis, Trump, or Nikki Haley. There's been some staunch Vivek Ramaswamy supporters too, but in terms of the candidates not named Trump, they're all giving them at least a fair shake. There are Trump supporters, though, who are dug in, and they're not willing to vote for anybody else. We're going to see a lot of that tonight as well.
Yes, and we saw that in our polling as well. Aaron Navarro, Torian Small, and Nydia Cavazos in Iowa. Thank you all very much for tonight and all your hard work out there. A reminder, we will have continuing coverage of the Iowa caucuses throughout the evening with special editions of America Decides and CBS News Prime Time, the first at 8 and the second at 10 Eastern, respectively. A new CBS News poll shows us what we already know. Immigration is a top issue for Republican voters. 83% of the likely primary voters that CBS spoke to say they want to hear the candidates talk a lot about the border. It's second only to the economy and inflation. A previous CBS News poll of both Republicans and Democrats found that 70% disapprove of President Biden's handling of immigration. So let's bring in senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang for more to talk about the policies behind some of these opinions. Weijia, let's start with the record high border crossings in December. They hit a record. What do the first weeks of 2024 look like?
Well, John, that record back in December was about 10,000 migrants crossing the border a day. And when you look at the most recent numbers that we have from yesterday, it was 4,100. So obviously that is a significant decrease that administration officials say is because historically after Christmas in the new year, the numbers tend to drop anyway. And they are seeing Mexico really add to the number of enforcement officials on the ground there as well. So they do believe that's having a big impact. And of course, they say their message of deterrence could be working as well. John.
So the Biden administration is in a tussle with Texas authorities over the border on a number of fronts. Tell us what's the latest in that fracas.
So you're right. Just today, the Department of Homeland Security, or I should say, a few days ago, sent a letter to Texas, a cease and desist letter, because Texas National Guard abruptly seized a portion of the border, about a 2.5-mile stretch, last week. And they were blocking access, continue to block access for federal border protection agents to get through. We also know that on Friday, there was a group of migrants trying to cross the Rio Grande River, and DHS says those Border Patrol agents requested access. The federal agents tried to get there to intervene and to help because there appeared to be trouble. But then we know that one woman and 2 children died. And so now they are saying that Texas has to immediately stop blocking access because they say it could be a matter of imminent danger for people. But Texas and the governor, Greg Abbott, says that the state has control and authority to control the areas of the southern border that are within the state. So you're right, John, this is a back and forth. DHS has given Texas until Wednesday to comply to the cease and desist letter and to move aside. And if that does not happen, they say they will refer the matter to the Justice Department to take appropriate action. But this is just the latest in a string of things Texas has done because they say the Biden administration is not doing enough.
And then finally, Weijia, there are ongoing negotiations between White House officials and congressional Republicans over some kind of a border deal that would unlock, the president hopes, his funding request for foreign aid to Ukraine and Israel. What's the status of those negotiations?
Well, they are ongoing, John, and they have been heavily focused on asylum rules and how strict the government is when it comes to migrants who come to the border seeking asylum. But we now know that there are other measures on the table being seriously considered, and that includes giving refugees from Afghanistan permanent status. It includes more protections for the group of migrants known as Dreamers, who are children who are brought here to the U.S. And then they also want to allow those migrants who have been approved to work here to have a preliminary interview for asylum and to see whether they can have a more permanent status as well. And so even though these measures are being considered and the White House is very optimistic about it, there are some tough Republicans, hardliners, who say they do not believe in the House this would ever pass, even if the group of bipartisan senators come to an agreement, which is already very difficult. So, John, to answer your question, even though the White House says they're making progress and the group of senators working on the deal there say they're doing a good job, it doesn't matter because, of course, all of Congress has to approve it, and that has been difficult for decades.
And the clock is ticking on that foreign aid. Weijia Jiang, senior White House correspondent. Thanks so much, Weijia.
You're welcome.
A ballistic missile struck a U.S. cargo ship in the Red Sea. We'll have more on who claimed responsibility and how this latest attack affects the push to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from escalating. You're streaming CBS News Prime Time. A U.S.-owned cargo ship was struck by a ballistic missile in the Red Sea Monday, according to U.S. Central Command. This comes as the Israel-Hamas war hits 100 days. Our Ian Lee reports.
100 days of war has reduced Gaza to this. Desperate and hungry, Palestinians swarm an aid truck in Gaza City. The UN says many of the territory's 2.2 million residents risk starvation. "We did nothing wrong," cries this boy.
Wake up, world!
The nightmare is felt on both sides of the border. Israelis with loved ones still held hostage demand their release.
It's 100 days of absolute torture and torment for the families who are waiting.
Hamas's brutal attack on October 7th triggered all this misery. Militants stormed into Israel, killing more than 1,200 people and seizing roughly 250 hostages, including children and the elderly. Israel launched an air and ground assault on Gaza, with troops storming cities, fighting militants, and searching for tunnels. While more than 24,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. During a ceasefire in November, Hamas released more than 100 hostages in exchange for more than 200 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Pressure is building on Israel to wrap up the war. But Israel vows to continue the fight until Hamas is destroyed and the hostages returned home. Ian Lee, CBS News.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was released from the hospital Monday after being treated for complications from cancer surgery. Austin underwent prostate surgery in late December and was readmitted on January 1st after developing an infection. He concealed his health developments from the Biden administration until January 4th after his readmission. In a statement, Austin says he will perform his duties from home and is eager to return to the Pentagon. The people of Taiwan are also making their voices heard in national elections. They elected a leader from the country's ruling Democratic Progressive Party, rejecting a bid from the China-friendly Nationalist Party. Elizabeth Palmer reports.
William Lai Ching-de is 64 years old. He's the son of a coal miner. He's also a Harvard graduate in public health, and he is Taiwan's next president. He won a decisive victory on Saturday after millions of voters cast ballots in national elections. 24 hours after his win, a U.S. delegation sent by President Biden arrived in Taipei to congratulate him and everyone who'd taken part in what was a fair democratic contest. China isn't so pleased. It has in the past called Lai a dangerous separatist because he rejects China's claim on Taiwan. The good news is that China is expressing its displeasure in words and not threatening displays of missiles and warships as it has in the past. That may reflect a shift in tone generally to dial back the aggressive rhetoric we've heard over the past 5 years directed against the U.S. and its allies, including Taiwan. Because Lai won 40% of the vote, China claims he doesn't represent a majority of Taiwanese. But poll after poll shows that most people don't want to lose their democracy to a takeover by the Chinese Communist Party. Taiwan's relationship with China is far from settled, though. In the past, China has refused even to talk to the next president and his party, but William Lai hopes that this is a new chapter beginning, and in order to reduce tension, China will at least come to the bargaining table. John?
Elizabeth Palmer, thank you. Still to come, we'll look at what past presidential elections tell us about how we should look at the winners and losers of the Iowa caucuses. You're streaming CBS News Prime Time. The Iowa caucuses can launch campaigns onto the nomination or bury them beneath the snowdrifts. Depends on which party you're in. For Democrats, 6 of the past 10 winners in Iowa who weren't already in office went on to secure the party's nomination. 2 of the mythical campaigns in Democratic Party lore were born out of big victories there. Jimmy Carter's top showing in 1976 and Barack Obama's win in 2008. It's a different story for Republicans. For the GOP, Iowa is either a graveyard for campaigns or false hope. Phil Gramm, Lamar Alexander, and Michelle Bachmann all invested heavily in the state, and when the voters didn't reciprocate, they ended their campaigns. George Herbert Walker Bush won Iowa in 1980 and declared he had the momentum. The Big Mo, he called it, until Reagan clobbered him in future contests. That was also the fate of Bob Dole, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, and Ted Cruz. Since the 1980 election, only 2 winners in Iowa, Bob Dole in 1996 and George W. Bush in 2000, earned the GOP nomination. But past performance is no guarantee of future results, and so GOP candidates have been spending big. Republicans spent more than $100 million on ads in Iowa in 2023. A few million more were estimated to be spent on ads in the 15 days of 2024 before the caucuses. So why all the attention on Iowa if it doesn't often pick the GOP nominee? Because in winnowing the field, it presents voters with a clearer choice of future contests. Depending on how things go tonight, for example, if there is a clear first and second place, it could become a 2-person race. Quite an achievement for the process in the state, given that the nominating race started with 15 candidates. Up next, my colleagues Major Garrett and Nora O'Donnell lead a special edition of America Decides as results from the Iowa caucuses start to come in. For all of us here in the newsroom, I'm John Dickerson. Thank you for spending the hour with us.